So let's go through how to play Warhammer 40K 11th edition one chunk at a time. And first up, talk model soldiers, dice, rulebooks and miniatures with what you need to play in the first place. Hello and welcome to Auspex Tactics, a channel all about the happenings, news and releases of Warhammer 40k with a main focus on gameplay. In this video series we're going to be talking through how to play Warhammer 40k 11th edition from the perspective of a new player, aiming to break down each chunk of the game in turn. And for this one we'll start with what you need to play, then cover the core rules going through each phase of the game and all the special rules after that. So stick around and subscribe if you'd like to see more. I'll link the how to play videos together in a how to play Warhammer 40k playlist down below in the video description. For this one though, let's talk about some basics for what you need to play Warhammer, which is a somewhat involved subject in itself. Some things you absolutely need, plenty of things that are nice enough to have, and certainly the way that Games Workshop delivers the rules for the game can be confusing to a new player. Jumping straight in with the most exciting bits, Warhammer 40k is a game where you battle your miniature army against an opponent's one, so you're going to need some miniatures to start with, whether they're power-armoured Imperial Space Marines, Twisted Servants of Chaos, or all manner of disturbing alien Xenos. Warhammer 40k has got a vast amount of different factions that you can choose to play. Picking an army is a big subject in itself. I'll leave one of my videos linked down in the video description to that end. The general advice tends to be to go for something that you really like the overall look and feel of the miniatures, as Games Workshop might change game rules and power levels of armies, but if you really like the look and feel of the miniatures that you've painted up, they'll hopefully be the things that endure one edition to another. There is a lot more to be said about the subject though. Some armies are more expensive, some are cheaper, some are more complex to play, and some might be straightforward but a bit limited in playstyle. The sheer variety of different armies that you might see on the tabletop is one of the big appeals of Warhammer 40k though. When you buy some miniatures for your army, they come in a box and come unassembled on the model sprues like this in the middle, and then you'll glue them together, paint them up so you have little figurines on round bases like on the right. Warhammer miniatures certainly have a reputation for being expensive for the amount of plastic and models that you get on the table. You can often surprise non-collectors by telling a miniature that the size of your thumb somehow cost around $50 or £30. So to take the edge off it a little bit when buying new plastic things, I generally aim to buy via a discount retailer in your area. They're official Warhammer stockists that can usually sell somewhere between 15 and 20% off. I have a whole bunch of those links down in the video description. Some good examples I wouldn't hesitate to recommend from around the world. These ones are channel affiliates that these sales help to support Auspex Tactics a touch, though in plenty of places around the world just give a search and you'll find a vast amount of other good ones too. I say perhaps most people when they want to collect Warhammer generally want to assemble new plastic kits and put their guys together. There are other options though. You can get units and entire armies much cheaper second hand, say on eBay or local groups with people reselling their armies. That can be one of the easiest ways to get a Warhammer army for cheap. And also 3D printing is really quite a big thing in the Warhammer hobby. There's plenty of sort of near proxy models that aren't quite the same as Games Workshop's ones, but can do well enough as stand-ins, and they can be quite a nice resource for getting some cool aesthetic parts for your army. Plenty of people do choose to pick up a 3D printer, though bear in mind it's basically a hobby in its own right, and does take a bit of time. Whether you've assembled your new plastic kits, bought some second-hand or 3D printed stuff, it will then be time to assemble and paint them. There's lots of ways to go about miniature painting. Typically for official plastic Warhammer miniatures, I'll be clipping them out with some clippers, removing some small jagged bits with either a craft knife or files, sticking them together either with plastic glue or super glue, undercoating with a spray can aimed at miniature painting, and then painting them up from there in the style of your choice. For some, the assembly and painting is by far the most important bit of the hobby, and you have god-tier artists competing for golden demons. For others it's a bit more of a means to an end. Paint up your guys with a rough and ready bit of contrast paint, get them looking fairly nice, and hit the tabletops for some games. For the amount of miniatures you might need to play a Warhammer game, it could vary quite a lot. If you're completely new, it might not be the worst idea to start with Games Workshop's Combat Patrol game mode. That's basically their box set versus box set one. Playing that can be a good way to learn the game of 40k, though it is maybe a little bit on the simplistic side, and you don't have so many options for customizing your army. Combat Patrol boxes can be a great place to start a regular 40k army though, as they basically have a discount on the miniatures within, so if your faction has a good one, it can be one of the best first purchases. Otherwise, for playing more mainstream games of Warhammer 40k, I'd probably aim to build up towards an 1000 point game, though you can play lower points values if you'd like. That's fairly manageable and interesting enough to give you the full experience, though the most common full fat game size maybe played at tournaments and things is 2000 points. The amount of miniatures you might need for that might vary quite a lot. Basically depends on whether you bring small ones or big elite ones. Safe for a fairly balanced force though, with some infantry and some tanks and vehicles, perhaps somewhere in the region of 40 to 90 models is a reasonable sort of ballpark. There's lots of ways that you can go about collecting a 40k army. If you're new with the game, I think it's usually not the worst idea to start with one of the discount sets and then expand kind of slowly from there, rather than buying 2,000 points all at once. It can be hard to maintain motivation in the face of huge amounts of grey plastic models. Once again, collecting each individual army is a subject in its own right. I've made a video about literally all of them here on the channel if you'd like to take a look. Some of them might be a little bit more up to date than others though. Again, one of the coolest things about Warhammer 40k is you have people collecting armies of very different styles and taking them in their own direction. And while there's some more obvious ways that you can take armies that probably make more sense, if you want to go heavy on some sort of niche tank or unit for your faction, you absolutely can. When people are first getting going, storage often tends to be improvised and a bit rough and ready. For miniatures that are a bit more chunky and robust, like say Space Marines, I've had lots of success just with bubble wrap and very simple boxes myself. There's lots of fancier stuff out there though. Magnetic storage is really quite popular these days, putting magnets on the miniatures of the bases so they're held in place as they're transported, and there's plenty of foam cases out there as well. Basically, I'd recommend having transport solutions that are going to be good enough that your miniatures don't get damaged, as you don't want to spend lots of money on a miniature, lots of hours making it look nice, and then have it get broken. Moving on, if you're rocking up to a game of 40k, as well as your actual miniatures, there's a few things that you need to take along from a gameplay perspective. First up, 40k is played with 6-sided dice, and often units have quite a lot of attacks. I'd say something like around 20 or so would be a minimum, though it might be helpful to have more if you're playing an army that's got, say, loads of attacks and is a great big horde. Some people quite enjoy expensive faction-themed ones, where you have the army logo in place of the 6, though you can find small cheap coloured ones on the internet really quite affordably, and they can be quite practical on the tabletop. If you wanted, you could pick up a dice tray to roll into. That can keep things a little bit neater, though it's not essential. Next up, perhaps the only other absolute essential will be a tape measure. Doesn't have to be a particularly fancy one, just one that measures in inches, as that's what Warhammer 40k is measured in. You need it to measure weapon ranges and how far units can move. Some people also like to have small combat gauges as well, say 8-inch ones to measure out deep strike, 2-inch ones to check coherency, or maybe some common movement distances like 6 inches for a lot of infantry, though again that's more of a speed sort of thing, and you can absolutely just use a regular tape measure for that. Then beyond that, there's plenty of other things that would be nice to have. You could use some notes on your phone to keep score in the missions, though with the complexity of 11th edition mission scoring, it will be better to have something that's dedicated to it. A pen and paper can be pretty handy, and there are scoring apps for Warhammer 40k as well. Games Workshop's own Warhammer 40,000 one will be able to do that in 11th edition when it updates. Though otherwise, for a good third-party one, the Tabletop Battles app is really quite widely used. When it's fully updated for Games Workshop's rules changes, you can plug the missions that you're playing into it and score turn by turn. Otherwise, could be handy enough to have some higher value dice for tracking wounds and things. Say if you have an 18 wound model, you could get a 20-sided dice to mark that if you'd like to, or use multiple d6 6-sided dice. Certain factions might have some use for some counters to mark any ongoing effects, say faction-specific ones, or maybe battle shock. It can just be easier than memorising everything to put counters nearby when things are active. And there's plenty more gaming aids that some people enjoy. You could make cheat sheets for your armies, pick up some faction data cards when they release for some handy flashcards for rule reference, and some people quite enjoy laser rangefinders to measure line of sight. For basics when you're just starting out though, some 6-sided dice, a tape measure, and then something to keep score with is all you really need to play 40k. Then as well as armies and some things to play them with, you also need somewhere to set them up and fight over. There's nothing really stopping you from adapting the rules to make battlefields of different sizes. If you're playing kitchen table Warhammer, it might be a necessity, though for Games Workshop's recommended game sizes, it's usually 44 by 30 inches for Combat Patrol, and then 44 by 60 inches for most normal games of Warhammer 40k, say Incursion at 1,000 points or Strike Force at 2,000. If you want to play full-on big-style Warhammer 40k, that is quite a big surface that might not fit on most normal tables, so if you're improvising a bit and not playing on the floor or something, the battlefield might be a little bit more squished than normal. Not everyone necessarily needs a playing surface in their own home, of course. Plenty of people just simply won't have the room for that kind of thing. It's perhaps most common for people to meet to play at local stores or clubs if you have one available near you, or maybe at the house of someone who does have a good sized gaming setup. It tends to be more third-party stores and clubs rather than official Warhammer stores for the most part. It might depend on local ones, but some of them are more friendly to gaming than others. In general though, independent hobby stores tend to do better, unless you're lucky enough to live next to say Warhammer World in the UK, or a bigger sized Warhammer store somewhere else. Basically though, not literally every player needs to own a full battlefield worth of terrain. If you did want to have your own setup at home though, you can just play on the table or maybe have a battle mat. A number of third-party companies make various different playing surfaces, usually sort of out of neoprene mouse mat style material, maybe priced in the region of sort of £60 or $70 or thereabouts. Then when you have a playing surface, you can put some terrain on top of it, either ruins or woods or barricades or anything else, or again if you're just starting out, often improvised terrain made from various boxes or books and things around the house. Wherever you're getting terrain though, probably one of the more important things for a 40k battlefield is that it makes the gameplay a lot better if both players are able to hide their armies to some extent, otherwise it just often boils down to whoever goes first with all the big guns to blow the enemy army to bits turn 1. It means that ideally you want some large terrain pieces both in the midboard and also in the opponent's deployment zones, as the terrain and scenery is quite a big part of how current 40k plays. In 11th edition, Games Workshop is selling their own terrain footprints, the idea being that these are the bases of terrain, and then you can put whatever terrain pieces that you have a fancy on top of them. Maybe they could be the bases for ruins or barricades or generators or something. These specific ones are used to set up their tournament style boards, as you can see a layout for them on the bottom left here, and whether or not you need these depends on the style of Warhammer 40k that you're going to play. If you've got to focus on the gameplay, tactics, and want to have a relatively fair fight between two armies, it's probably going to be the system that best supports that, but if you want to tell narrative stories and treat Warhammer more as a role-playing game with a focus on the narrative behind the fight, these ones probably aren't all that essential, and you might be better off setting up a battlefield to fight over whichever environment your armies are fighting in at the moment. Games Workshop do have those bits as their most official tournament layouts, though they have also written the rules in such a way that you can completely use your own terrain set for it if you'd like to. In 11th edition, Games Workshop have blurred the line between terrain pieces and objective markers on their tournament style terrain layouts. Those big square ruin pieces are the objectives, so you'd either need some terrain areas that represent those and the locations that your forces are going to fight over. You could also just mark them out with the standard objective markers that we've used for a long time in 40k, and just have your forces fighting over archaeotech or relics or something, if that makes more sense for the game board that you're playing on. Games Workshop have announced that they have one of their own specific terrain sets coming for 11th edition 40k. These bits are designed to work well with their terrain areas, and they have some fun stuff with some generators, electric fences, some ruins and more. And they'll have the set both available as an unpainted version and also a pre-painted version. I think it does look like quite a cool set personally, though I kind of dread to think exactly how much it's going to cost. The general rule is that getting terrain from third parties is almost certainly going to be far cheaper than Games Workshop if you want a dedicated set for a whole board. The companies that make terrain sets will go on to innovate and create some nice things to work well with Games Workshop's terrain areas. There's a pretty vast amount of stuff out there. MDF ruins tend to be some of the cheapest thing that you can get to make a functional battlefield. They can look a little sad if you don't have time to hobby them up and make them look nice though. Otherwise you can get some versions of that come pre-painted, like the offerings from Lighter Creative, and there's some pre-painted plastic sets out there, like Futureproof and their modular terrain. There's way more out there though, including some really cool 3D printed stuff, and the 11th edition system is going to be more flexible compared with previously for 40k. The idea is that particularly if you're marking out the terrain with those terrain areas, to a greater or lesser extent, you can put what you like on them, so you could have your armies fighting over ruins, statues, woods, or anything else. The bigger impact thing are the terrain areas versus exactly what's on it. Then finally having the armies and things to play them with, the terrain and the battlefield, we now go on to the rules, which is probably one of the more confusing areas for new players. Broadly speaking though, the three main areas that you need are the core rules for Warhammer 40k, that tell how armies play against each other in general. Then the rules that are specific to your faction, the stats for your individual models on the tabletop, and any extra powers or boosts given to them by their army rule or their detachments, and then the rules for the mission that you're playing on the tabletop, possibly the chapter approved deck, though Games Workshop often adapts mission rules to other things like narrative gameplay as an edition goes on, or you could make up your own custom mission rules and scenarios. For the core rules, they're sort of an 80-ish pages worth of primary gameplay that governs how armies in Warhammer 40k interact and fight with each other. As with 10th edition, they'll be available to freely download from Warhammer Community in the Warhammer 40k download section. They'll also of course be available shipped out around the world in the Armageddon box set initially. That's got a fairly portable slimline rulebook in it, and they'll also be sold separately as the 10th edition core book after the box set has come out. You don't necessarily need a physical rulebook though, as it will be available digitally, and it's pretty well guaranteed that Games Workshop will acquire a lot of digital errata and addition to the rules as time goes on, often later and towards the end of an edition. They've built up so many revisions and changes that quite a lot is adapted since the core book came out. I won't say too much more about the core rules, as they're the ones I'm going to be talking about in this series of videos. As a slight aside, if you are a beginner to Warhammer 40k in general, in the past Games Workshop have had great big core rulebooks that have both had the rules plus a bunch of beginner hobby and lore content. It seems they've moved that beginner hobby and lore content to the Combat Patrol Companion book, alongside a breakdown of each army focusing on their combat patrols. It's by no means a necessary purchase, but if you are completely new to Warhammer, might have at least some interest for some people out there. Then we have the faction rules for each army, which have their biggest primary rule source being their Codex book that's on sale at the moment. Fairly pricey books to buy from Games Workshop at £38 or $60. The Warhammer 40k's current system is a sort of hybrid one. You have the base book and then a bunch of digital downloads and the Warhammer 40k app to support it. At least on paper, if you are going by the official rule source, you need both the codex and then either the downloads or the app to support them. The codexes themselves give you an overview of the army, things like lore, model showcases, and some narrative rules. Then you have the core rule for each army, say Battle Focus for the Eldar, or some Dark Pacts for the Chaos Space Marines. You have the profile and rules for each individual unit called their datasheets, and then you have their sort of sub-faction rules called detachments, say whether you're playing your force as a tank spearhead, or a force that's focused around close combat, or some other variation or army archetype. If you buy a new codex from the shop, it comes with an unlock code for the Warhammer 40,000 app to get all the codex rules available digitally, and Games Workshop keep those digital rules up to date, rolling in any balance passes or updates to the points or anything that changes for the unit's profiles. Aside from Games Workshop though, there are third parties that host the rules unofficially, maybe most notably Warhampedia, and New Recruit with its army builder has plenty of the rules available as well. Plenty of new players tend to use those initially if wanting to check out an army's rules before buying, and I must admit it is a bit of a weird system for Games Workshop that if you wanted the entire Warhammer 40k rule set from the official source, you'd have to buy that 26 codex books at $60 US, which realistically very few people are going to do. For the digital rules updates, the current crop of Warhammer 40k codexes released throughout 10th edition, and since that time have built up a number of balance changes, corrections and general updates, so things have already changed quite a lot to them, and then a new stack of further digital updates is going to be piled on for the start of 11th. To find these you can just reference the rules in the app, that generally has the most up-to-date profiles for them, so if you want the official errata documents that add the digital rules in for your codexes, that's on the Warhammer community webpage in the download section for Warhammer 40k. Those third-party sites also tend to track the balance changes as well, that might take a little bit of time to update. If you wanted to look at the update content on the Warhammer community webpage though, go to the top right on the download section and then select Warhammer 40,000 under that. The most important sections are the core rules at the top, that'll be where the core rules will be, any updates to them and the Minotaur and Field Manual, and they also have the balance data slate there as well, the document for making balance changes to Warhammer 40,000's armies. Then just below that there's the section on faction packs, that'll be the most important thing to get up to date with your army, as they have a mix of FAQs and errata, other content that's been added in since the army came out, like new units that have models released, or new detachments that have been added into the game, plus a whole bunch of legacy units with support in the Legends section. Overall, there's a few different ways to reference Warhammer 40k rules. Some like the Codex and errata, some make good use of the Warhammer 40k app, some use third-party sites like Warhampedia. Then for using those faction rules and the points cost to build some armies, you can just do it with pen and paper, calculator, or an Excel spreadsheet. The majority of people tend to use one of the army builders out there. New Recruit is a particularly popular community one, and I'd happily recommend that one as working well for putting army lists together. Otherwise, Games Workshop's Warhammer 40,000 app also works decently, though it's got kind of limited functionality if you don't have both the Codex code and a Warhammer Plus subscription. I'm not sure if they'll change things for 11th edition, but currently the Army Builder has the disadvantage that if you don't have a Warhammer Plus subscription, you can only save one list at a time, which locks a good chunk of functionality behind a paywall. I'd bear in mind that for faction rules, Games Workshop's going to be updating and rolling them out throughout 11th edition, and all the current crop of codexes will be updated with a new replacement, likely mostly within the first 2 years of 11th edition after it comes out, though a few might be a little later than that. It can make the current codexes just a little bit of an uncertain purchase. For some armies you get literally years of use out of them, for others they might be coming up fairly soon, We know that Space Marines and Orcs are going to be the first two. I think there were some rumours to say that Tau might be fairly soon as well. I'd probably say that if you're a completely new player to 40k jumping in at the moment, I would pick up your faction's codex, besides potentially not bothering and making use of third-party things to bridge the gap for Space Marines and Orcs. Then finally, for rules things that you need, there's the mission rules. And this will depend on exactly what sort of game that you're playing, though Games Workshop in 11th edition really seem to be wanting to centralise Warhammer 40k around using these chapter-approved mission deck cards, which I would consider the default way to play 40k unless you want to go via a different game mode. These mission cards will either be in the Armageddon box set and then sold separately shortly after. As they go, they're fairly intuitive, telling you what to do in terms of scoring your primary and secondary objectives. I feel like the card system's quite a nice way of doing it, quite tactile and easy to pick up and take a closer look at and reread a rule if you can't remember. Otherwise though, if you're playing Combat Patrol, the rules for that will be found digitally within the download section, as with the rules for the individual Combat Patrol armies themselves. And Games Workshop will certainly have plenty of narrative content coming as well in 11th edition 40k. The 10th edition codexes have their Crusade content for that narrative progressive campaign mode that's going to be less focused in 11th edition, though it still looks like it will apply pretty well between that and the missions. And I've got no doubt that Games Workshop will release some other ways to play, both sort of casual play twists on missions that you could do, or narrative scenarios and campaign backs as the edition goes on. Talking of which, and slightly beyond the need for missions on any one game, is if you want to play a campaign with your games linked together. As mentioned a second ago, the Crusade rules are one way of doing that. Games Workshop had a couple of campaign modes in their End Edition campaign in the Pariah Nexus and Maelstrom books. So there's also another one for linked games coming out in the Armageddon box set, the Dominatus campaign deck, which has you fighting a simple campaign over 3 phases to try and liberate Armageddon from the Orcs. At first impressions, it looks fairly straightforward and punchy, and maybe a little bit less involved and commitment on the admin side versus Crusade, and I suspect that a good number of people will get some good value out of it. It's very much not necessary for playing any one game of Warhammer 40k, though if you want to take things to the next level, it can be fun and have a sense of progression to your games. In any case, that just about covers where I'm going for this one. If you're new to Warhammer 40k, welcome to the hobby, and hope you have a good time painting up some miniatures and putting them on the battlefield. As mentioned, check out the playlist links down in the video description. I'll be gradually populating that with more videos in this How to Play series, and the next one shall be the Command Phase one once it's out. I'll link that down in the video description if you'd like to get into the regular turn structure of 40k next. Otherwise, a big thank you for listening. As mentioned, if you were looking to pick up any Warhammer 40k models in the near future, check out the channel's affiliate discount links in the video description if you'd like to. These ones sell Games Workshop's official Warhammer miniatures at a small discount, as that's the way they operate. There's Element Games in the UK for around 15 to 20% off, Warhouse and Gap Games in Australia for 21%, Fenris Workshop in Canada for 10%, Wargame Portal for 15% in the USA, and Taschengeldieb in Germany and the EU for 16%, though it can be more with their discount codes. A big thanks to anyone choosing to pick up some fancy plastic model soldiers through those ones specifically. It does help to support Auspex Tactics and the videos that I make. There's plenty of other great stores out there, of course, though. In any case, I'll leave that one there for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and I tend to have new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes as to what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.